What's your story?
I want to talk about my journey through domestic violence and how it all started. I was very young. I was a senior in high school, and I met a man at church who was a few years older than me, actually 5 years older than me, right at the end of my senior year. And I was so happy. I had a wonderful senior year. I was just on top of the world, and I was making plans to go away to college. And he came into my life, and it was like a whirlwind. He swept me off my feet. He seemed like Prince Charming. He made all these promises and was going to make all my dreams come true. And before I knew it, that summer, he had asked me to marry him. I was 18 years old. He told me I could still go to college. He said, you know, I'll be here waiting for you when you get back. But it wasn't the same. Going away to college knowing that you were, you know, engaged to someone far, far away. So after a lot of convincing from him and coercing, he thought it might be better if I stayed local and went to school locally. And so I gave up a scholarship that I had to go away to a Christian college. And so, you know, to say the least, my parents were a little alarmed, but I don't know how I convinced them that I was in love with him. And within 2 months, there were plans to build a house. And by October, we had broken ground. So we're talking from April to October, and we were already building a house. I was 18 years old.
Wow.
And at the time, you know, that was huge. That was big. It was you know, more than a lot of adults who have been married for 20 years were able to do, you know. But his parents were going to foot the bill, and we would just buy the house from them eventually, and it would be ours. So, and it was right next door to his parents. So, looking back, that's all a huge red flag.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk about my story to women, I usually have my red flag, and I forgot it today. But when I talk about it and there's something that is so poignant, I usually raise a red flag just to let people know that, take note of that. So, you know, he wanted me to spend all my time with him. He didn't want to be apart. And, you know, if I wanted to go out with a girlfriend, he would make me feel bad about it, but put it in a way as, you know, because he didn't want to be away from me. So I wasn't understanding how this was all happening, but it was just part of the process of sweeping someone off their feet and then eventually having ultimate control and power over that person. It doesn't happen overnight, and you don't realize it when it's happening to you. I just need to stop and say that I was not a naive person. I was a smart girl, but it can happen to anyone. Doesn't matter how smart you are. And coming from any walk of life, that this can happen. And so before a year was up, we were married and living in a brand new house. And I had gone to school and gotten my certification for dental assisting and had a job. Mm. And I was already an adult living my life. So looking back, you know, there were so many red flags, bursts of anger, just what I could and couldn't do. When we were first married, he wanted to control all of the money. He would give me just enough for what I needed, and sometimes not even that. So just little by little, it became a control situation. And I think because I had regrets, I was embarrassed. Also have to say, you know, because we met at church, I initially thought that this must be God's will because we met at church. He's a Christian man, I'm a Christian woman, and certainly this is all, you know, been established by God. And I know that that's not the case now. Shouldn't have happened. But anyway, he used scriptures and, you know, expected me to be the perfect Christian woman. And by using scriptures and things like that, he would find ways to put me down and make me feel unworthy. And so I was constantly trying to be a better person, be a better wife, be, you know, everything he wanted me to be, because if that, then he would be happy. So I knew he had some demons and some problems, but because I'm one of those type of people, and I think people like this tend to prey on people who are more compassionate, because we sympathize a lot, we empathize, and, you know, I kept thinking I can help him. And so it was just really a cycle that was unhealthy. And because of my Christian upbringing, and the last thing my mom said to me, you know, marriage is forever. And he would say the same things, you know, divorce isn't an option, and if you don't like it, too bad. You know, this is your bed, you lie in it. And so I had sort of resolved at some point to just say, this is my life, I guess I'll just make the best out of it that I can. But, you know, we went on to have 2 beautiful daughters. And our life was a facade because we went to church. I taught Sunday school. He, you know, served at church as well. And on the outside, we looked like the perfect all-American family, yet behind closed doors, it was not that at all. And I was extremely unhappy. Riddled with anxiety all the time. Many times afraid. I knew how to not make waves, so I didn't. So the only way to do that was by going with everything that he wanted and everything, you know, the way he wanted it. I mean, down to anything. I just felt like I could never make my own choices, my own decisions. I couldn't spend money unless I asked him. I remember this one time, and I'll have these things just pop into my head from time after time, but my oldest daughter was probably about 8 months old, and I had put her last diaper on her, and we needed diapers. And so I told him, and he said, well, it's too bad. And I was like, well, she needs diapers, you know, what am I going to do? And this is how low I was at this point in time, because I was so afraid to keep pushing him for money that I was at a friend's house, and when she went into the other room, I looked in her purse for money. So I didn't end up taking it because I just couldn't. But that's how much control he had over me. And, you know, it's the craziest thing. We were married for almost 15 years. When my second daughter was 3, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. So at that point, I stopped even thinking that there might be a chance to leave, because I couldn't leave with a seriously ill daughter. So I just stayed and made the best of it. As long as I didn't make waves, he wasn't violent. But you can only do so much for so long. You know, there comes a point in time where you just can't let somebody control every single move you make and try to make you something that you're not. And so fast forward a few years, and one night we got into a fight, and he had me down on the couch, basically on top of me, with his hands on me, and my oldest daughter walked into the room. And at that moment, I knew that it was over. I was done. I wasn't going to allow this. I wasn't going to allow my girls to think that this kind of life was okay.
Right.
And up until this point, I pretty much hid things from them. And I often said, you know, my girls didn't know anything that was happening, and our, you know, with us between my husband and I, because they never saw anything physically happen to me. But looking back, they had to have been affected by the way he treated me, because he treated me less than I should have been treated.
Mm-hmm.
I was the mother of their children, but he never built me up or treated me well. So at that moment, the switch went off, and I can just remember the change inside of me and how I felt. And yet I knew I couldn't just stand up and walk out the door, because by now I had had enough threats that if I ever tried to leave him, you know, that he would do unspeakable things. And I was terrified of him. So and to that day, and people will tell me to this day, like, how did I not know? And my sister, who I'm really close with, my best friend, my mom, no one knew what I was struggling with behind closed doors, because I was too embarrassed, because I felt like I failed. And, you know, I had always been raised that you don't divorce. Once you're married for life. And there are circumstances where you don't have to stay married. No one should be abused. No one should be treated poorly. So I started putting my ducks in a row. I confided in someone that I worked with. We had an attorney in my office building, and so I went to talk to him about it, and he told me some of the things that I needed to do ahead of time. And he said, you know, are you afraid? And I said, I'm extremely afraid. So he advised that I go to see a judge and get a restraining order in place. And so I did, and when I went, and this was in the year 2000, I had never filed a report or a complaint against him. I had never called the police. So he said I couldn't get it. And I told him how afraid I was. And he said, my hands are tied, I don't know what else to tell you. And so at this point, I had to change my plans a little bit. And I decided to finally tell my family what was going on, tell them that I couldn't live with him anymore, and that I was leaving and that I was scared. So I had my family, my brothers, my one sister, my parents were at the house, and when he came home, I had them surrounding me, and he said, what's going on? And I said, I want a divorce. I need to leave, or I need, you know, to not be together with you anymore. I don't want to be married to you anymore. And it was not pretty. He pitched a fit and yelled and screamed and told them all kinds of things about me that weren't true. He belittled me. He said horrible things. And then all at once he said, okay, if this is what you want, I'll leave. And so I wasn't 100% certain that he was okay with it. Actually, I knew he wasn't okay with it. Everyone else said, okay, you know. So my sister, for some reason, just decided to stay with me that night because I was upset, and everyone else left. And a little while later, he came home. And as soon as the alarm went off, I dialed 911. I had the phone in my hand because that's how afraid of him I was. I tossed the phone to my sister, and he attacked me. And without going into a lot of details, I had to be taken to the hospital by ambulance. So As horrible as that was, it sort of sealed the deal. Mm-hmm. If he hadn't have done that the next day, he probably would have used his charm and his "I'll change" mm-hmm. and all of that, like he's had done over and over and over. But at this point, my family saw who he was. My girls saw who he was, and they took me from the hospital to my daughters and I straight to a domestic violence shelter. And that was the best thing that could have ever happened to us, because I was removed from the people who I was really close to. And that sounds like a bad thing, but it wasn't, because I would have been coddled by them. And I know they love me, and that doesn't sound right, but they cared so much about me that they probably wouldn't have been the best people for me at that time. But going into a domestic violence shelter, we learned so many things, and they were able to empower me. For the first time in my life, I felt strong, and I felt like I wasn't the one with the problem. It wasn't my fault anymore. And I had been brainwashed for so long that all of these things, if I would just be better, if I did this, then he wouldn't be angry, or he wouldn't be mad at me, and I just need to be a better wife, or a better mother, or make more money, or be prettier, or skinnier, or whatever, you know. It was always, what's wrong with me? And I learned it wasn't me. I had been a beautiful young woman when we met, with a whole, you know, life ahead of me with great things. And yet saying that, we stayed in a shelter for a month. We decided to leave our marital home and move so that we could be a little further removed from him. I have to say, he was arrested. Mm-hmm. When he went to court, he was convicted, which at that time was a kind of a hard thing to happen, and sentenced to 3 years in prison. However, he never served any time because the judge felt if he would behave himself, he could then work and pay child support and support me. And to be quite honest, I was terrified that if he went to jail, that he would just be angrier and more vindictive when he got out. So it wasn't pretty. He broke his restraining orders numerous times. Within 3 months of leaving him, my daughter had a recurrence of her brain tumor. She was 9 years old, and they had been able to do surgeries 2 times prior to that, and at this point they couldn't do anything because the tumor was too deep. And we tried chemotherapy for a period of time. She couldn't have radiation because she had already had that, and by the following February she passed away. So he was not part of their life for that last 6 months because the judge said he couldn't have any contact after breaking the restraining order several times. It was a tough year, the toughest of my life. Mm-hmm. However, I learned a lot about myself, and I feel like without that experience, I wouldn't be the woman that I am today. And there was a period of time where I couldn't talk about my story because I was embarrassed about it. People like, well, how could, if somebody hit me or hurt me or talked nasty to me, then I would just leave. And it's not that easy. Like I said, there's a cycle of power and control, and it doesn't start off on your first date. Mm-hmm. It is, they coerce you and treat you good and make all these promises to you. And once they have you, so to speak, then they start revealing things from time to time. And then next thing you know, you're wondering why I'm not allowed to have a checkbook, or money or, you know, it's evil. And so what I learned in the shelter was, and then of course he was tested, you know, he had mandatory psychological testing, and he had to take anger management classes and that sort of thing, but was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. Goodness. And, you know, a narcissist has a very inflated opinion of themselves. They put themselves higher than anyone else. And life basically revolves around them and the way they want things. But there's also just an ugliness that they have to use in order to control someone. So at this time of year, when I see so many young women, and, you know, I say women aren't the only ones who are abused. Over the years, I've had many men come to me and tell me that they were in abusive relationships. But oftentimes men won't report it. I think it makes them feel less than a man. But women can be the perpetrators also. So it's not always women. But my heart is for women because I am a woman. And so I don't want to say that it's always women that are abused, because it's not. However, statistics do show that it is mostly women. 1 in 4 women are abused or have been abused in a relationship.
Wow, that's striking.
So with so many young women heading off to college and, you know, maybe finding that first relationship, their real first relationship in life, even high school girls, there's so many red flags to be aware of. You should always feel like you have some control in your life. You should never feel like someone else is controlling your where you go, who you hang out with. You know, if they're checking your phone or you're not responding to text messages and that makes them angry, if they don't trust you where you are and they want to check on you. I found out one time that he had followed me. This is before we were married, and I was going out with some friends, and he followed me. And when I found out about it, I was really taken aback. But as always, he just wanted to make sure it was safe and I'm not in a bad situation. And, you know, but really he was terrified that I was doing something against his wishes, or that maybe I was secretly seeing somebody else, but he had to know. Just always be aware and mindful that if someone loves you, truly loves you, they don't say ugly things to you. They don't call you names. They certainly don't make threats or make you feel scared. They treat you with respect at all times. It's crazy to think about some of the things when I look back that I allowed to happen, and you know, you get to a point where it's almost too late. So talk to your daughters and your friends, and like I said before, no one knew about my situation because everything looked perfect from the outside.
I like what you said about how if he'd showed up on day one, punching and being very vile, that you would have known immediately and you would have turned the other way. But it seems like he was very incremental about it, very strategic and manipulative, where he started small and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, so that by the time it was really, really big, you were already so invested, and you probably saw enough good and enough hope to think, oh, he'll change tomorrow, or next time it'll be better, or I'll be better. It's scary that it takes so much time to build up.
It is, and you know, the first time something happens that makes you question their behavior, it's immediately squelched, and you know, they may apologize and just say, you know, I'm sorry, I'm having a bad day. please forgive me, you know, don't leave me, don't, you know, I'm sorry, it'll never happen again. And if I had $1 for every time that was said to me in the beginning, I'd be rich. But then, you know, once it started happening in our marriage, there was very rarely apologies. It was always my fault. I was the one expected to apologize.
What advice can you give to somebody that's currently in that similar situation?
It's a difficult thing to give advice because oftentimes they're in a very dangerous situation. People who like to have control, when things start spiraling out of control, is when they become most dangerous. So when people say you should have just walked out, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. You can't just walk away from that. It's dangerous. And there have been so many threats made over the years, and I knew that he would follow through on them. So I think the best thing to do, and even, you know, even researching things on your laptop, your computer, where they can track your history is really dangerous. But there are, you know, nationally there's the domestic violence hotline that you can talk to people about your situation. They can certainly offer you the best advice. I learned in my shelter that we should have a safety plan in place. If there is someone that you can confide in who trusts your timing, who won't try to just snatch you out of the situation, who can trust you and let you go at your pace. If you could keep keys and money and a change of clothes for you and your kids at a separate location, to know that you can go someplace and be safe. You have to know, like, all the ways that they can track you. Nowadays with cell phones and things like that, it makes it even easier for them. So my best advice would be to seek out a shelter, but domestic violence shelter, counselors there that can walk you through the process and help protect you. Don't be afraid of leaving and going into a shelter, because they are the ones who are going to show you the steps to take to get away safely.
It sounds like a lot of pressure is put on somebody that's already so weakened by somebody else. Like you said, that you have to wait for the right timing. So to me, it just seems like you're already so weak. You just have, I guess, you almost have to pray for that bolster of courage and the right timing to know.
And for the door to open, I read a story, I think it was about a year ago, and I thought how ingenious this woman was, because she had gotten to that point where she knew she couldn't live another day like this, and had her husband or partner had, you know, abused her and locked the door, and you know, he decided he wanted some pizza, so she said she'd order pizza. And instead of calling the pizza delivery place, she called 911. And when they answered, she ordered pizza. And they said, "You have the wrong number." And she said, "No, I need this. How long till you can be here? What's your delivery time?" And then they realized what was going on, and they said, "Do you need help?" And she said yes. And so I thought, she's a genius. She's a genius, because the police showed up and rescued her. And she didn't have to be the one trying to run away and, you know, in more danger.
Right. Brilliant.
Brilliant. Very brilliant.
Wow.
I also need to mention, over the years, I would say that we were having marital problems, and the best thing for couples is to get counseling, right? Counsel, you can get through this and help your marriage. But with a narcissist and domestic violence situations, abusive situations, couples counseling is not recommended. And I can tell you why, because I was in it and I couldn't tell the truth about anything.
Mm-hmm.
Or it just would have been worse when I got home.
And he probably wouldn't be very truthful either.
Oh, he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
He had all the answers for them.
Mm-hmm.
And if they started speculating, because, they're trained to see how people behave, if they saw that, we didn't go back.
Mm-hmm. Well played.
Mm-hmm. So if you want help and you want to confide in someone that you can trust in, do it alone. A pastor, counselor, and I'm hoping at this point that, again, anyone can be healed, anybody can change, but the statistics are that these type of abusers, it's very rare for them to make a change. I know someone who counsels the perpetrators, and I didn't like him very much at first. But I realized he was caring for them the way we should.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, it might be 1 in 1,000 that makes a change. And he says he has them repeatedly coming back through the mandatory counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And, everything's always their fault.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What about from a friend's perspective? If you are the friend of somebody that's being abused, what advice can you give to somebody to be a good support person for that person?
Find out as much as you can about abuse. Try not to judge. Be patient. Pray for them. Pray for a solution to the problem, an open door. Offer them a safe place if you can. Ask them what they need.
Because as a friend, I could see the tendency to be angry, like,
Mm-hmm.
you've told me your story,
Mm-hmm.
now why don't you do something
Mm-hmm.
about it?
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, you have to wait for that proper timing and
Mm-hmm.
window, and you're encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good advice not to
Mm-hmm.
judge.
Mm-hmm. And having said that, though, don't let it go on forever. Try to talk to them and see if you can make a plan to make it happen too, because sometimes it's easier to stay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, you've lived this way for so long, it's just easier. And all of the unknowns can be overwhelming. How am I going to support myself? How am I going to support my children?
Mm-hmm.
Where am I going to live? What are people going to say about me? And never having all of your power taken away from you. The thought of being in control of everything can be very overwhelming.
That's a very good perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't even considered that. Well, thank you for telling your story so bravely, and I know it'll just settle in on the right person.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to encourage women that they can find happiness again. I intentionally wore my happy shirt today. It was one of my first Soulshine purchases.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, being happy is everything. I think when you've lived unhappy for so long, it's so much sweeter. And you are so much more appreciative of a good man who treats you kindly, of being able to make decisions on your own, not having to live with anxiety nonstop and fear. And if I can encapsulate my life at this point, I'm so happy.
Yes, you are. You're one blessed lady.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
You're an amazing lady and a very sweet friend.
Thank you.
Love you much.
Love you.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the dear friendship that I have with Sally. Thank you for what she's been through. As hard as it was on her heart, Father, you had a plan for everything, and nothing goes unseen, and you've been there with her in every moment as you continue to be with her in every moment. And I thank you that every bad thing is used for your glory and for your good. And I know that these things that have happened to Sally will go out and comfort somebody else that may be in this certain circumstance. So, Father, I pray that her words are true and her words are strong and her words are of you to give you the glory. And I pray, Father, that the words that she speaks will reach the right person. The right person will find her and give her comfort and strength to make the right next move. I pray all of this in your heavenly name, Father. Amen.
Amen.
I have to clap after a big prayer.